The tension between Ottawa and Washington has reached a boiling point, and this time the clock is ticking. Canada has delivered a stunning 48-hour ultimatum to Donald Trump over a massive $900 billion trade deal that could reshape the entire North American economy. Behind closed doors, officials are scrambling. Negotiators are racing against time, and the silence coming out of Washington is sending shockwaves through financial markets across the world. What began as a slow-burning trade disagreement has suddenly transformed into one of the most high-stakes economic confrontations in recent memory. The scale of the deal alone makes the stakes almost unimaginable. $900 billion tied to supply chains, energy exports, manufacturing pipelines, and technological partnerships now hangs in the balance. And as the countdown begins, the world is watching to see whether this confrontation ends in compromise, retaliation, or something far more destabilizing. Investors woke up to uncertainty. Businesses braced for impact. Analysts began recalculating projections. Because when two of the world's closest economic partners stand on the brink of a trade rupture of this magnitude, the consequences do not stay contained within borders. They ripple outward, touching currencies, commodities, employment forecasts, and political alliances. The question, echoing across financial capitals, is simple but urgent. What happens if the deadline passes and no response comes from Washington? Before we go deeper into this unfolding economic showdown and what it could mean for global markets and political power, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. These dramatic geopolitical and financial battles are shaping the future in real time, and you don't want to miss the next major development as this story continues to evolve. The ultimatum itself was delivered with precision and clarity. Canadian leadership signaled that after months of stalled negotiations, shifting proposals, and mounting frustration, patience had run out. The message to Washington was unmistakable. Respond within 48 hours with concrete commitments on the $900 billion trade framework, or face decisive economic countermeasures. It wasn't a symbolic deadline. It was a pressure point designed to force movement where months of diplomacy had produced only uncertainty. At the center of the dispute lies a sweeping trade arrangement covering energy transfers, cross-border manufacturing agreements, resource access, and critical technology supply chains. The proposed deal represents not just routine commerce, but the structural backbone of economic cooperation between the two nations. Billions in investments, infrastructure development, and long-term contracts depend on its stability. Any disruption could trigger cascading consequences across multiple sectors. Washington's silence has only intensified the drama. Normally, even in tense negotiations, signals emerge statements, briefings, or at least hints of direction. This time, however, the absence of an immediate public response has fueled speculation. Is the administration calculating its next move? Is it divided internally? Or is it preparing a counteroffer that could redefine the entire agreement? Markets do not respond well to silence. And in the hours following the ultimatum, volatility began creeping into sectors closely tied to cross-border trade. Currency traders watched closely as both the US dollar and Canadian dollar fluctuated amid uncertainty. Commodity markets reacted to the possibility of supply disruptions, particularly in energy and natural resources. Manufacturing stocks showed early signs of strain as investors weighed the risk of interrupted supply chains. Even technology firms with integrated North American operations felt the tremor as analysts began reassessing potential export restrictions and regulatory shifts. For Trump, the situation represents both a political and economic challenge. Known for his aggressive negotiation style and emphasis on securing advantageous trade terms, he now faces an ultimatum that tests his ability to balance domestic priorities with international stability. Responding too quickly could be seen as conceding leverage. Waiting too long could escalate the confrontation and unsettle markets further. Every option carries risk, and the 4 8-hour clock amplifies the pressure. Canadian officials, meanwhile, appear determined to demonstrate resolve. By setting a clear deadline, they have shifted the dynamics of negotiation. Rather than endless rounds of discussion, the focus is now on decisive action. Supporters of the ultimatum argue that clarity is necessary to protect national economic interests and ensure long-term certainty for businesses and workers. Critics warn that brinkmanship at this scale could backfire, triggering retaliatory measures and prolonged instability. The global dimension of this standoff cannot be overstated. The United States and Canada share one of the largest bilateral trade relationships in the world. Every day, billions of dollars in goods and services cross the border. Energy pipelines, automotive supply chains, agricultural exports, and technology partnerships form a complex web of interdependence. When that web is threatened, the ripple effects extend far beyond North America. European markets reacted cautiously as news of the ultimatum spread. Asian exchanges monitored developments closely, aware that disruptions in North American trade can influence global demand and investment flows. International financial institutions began quietly assessing potential scenarios, from swift resolution to prolonged standoff. The interconnected nature of modern commerce means that even a temporary disruption in such a massive deal can reshape global forecasts. Within the United States, industry leaders are watching with growing concern. Major corporations with cross-border operations depend on predictable trade conditions. Automotive manufacturers rely on components moving seamlessly between plants in both countries. Energy companies coordinate supply and distribution across shared infrastructure. Agricultural producers depend on stable export agreements. A breakdown in negotiations could force companies to rethink logistics, pricing, and even long-term investment strategies. Small and medium-sized businesses face their own uncertainties. Many operate on thin margins and cannot easily absorb sudden tariff increases or regulatory changes. The prospect of disrupted trade flows creates anxiety about inventory, shipping costs, and customer demand. For workers whose jobs depend on cross-border commerce, the stakes are deeply personal. Employment stability, wages, and local economic health all hang in the balance. Political analysts are dissecting the strategic motivations behind Canada's ultimatum. Some view it as a calculated move to accelerate negotiations that had stalled. Others interpret it as a signal of broader shifts in economic policy and national priorities. The timing is particularly significant, coming amid a global environment marked by supply chain reevaluation, economic nationalism, and heightened geopolitical competition. Trump's negotiating team faces a complex calculus. Accepting key terms could stabilize markets and preserve economic continuity, but might invite criticism from those demanding tougher stances. Rejecting or countering the ultimatum could assert strength, but risk escalating tensions. Attempting to renegotiate the framework entirely could extend uncertainty beyond the 4-8-hour window, prolonging market volatility and diplomatic strain. Behind the scenes, communication channels are likely active even as public silence persists. Diplomatic envoys, trade representatives, and economic advisors are undoubtedly assessing options, modeling outcomes, and exploring potential compromises. High-level negotiations often unfold away from cameras, with final decisions revealed only when agreements are reached or deadlines expire. The absence of public statements does not necessarily indicate inactivity, but it does heighten suspense. Financial markets thrive on information, and the scarcity of clear signals has amplified speculation. Analysts are running scenario projections. What if Washington meets the deadline with concessions? What if it responds with its own ultimatum? What if no agreement emerges at all? Each scenario carries distinct implications for equities, currencies, commodities, and long-term investment trends. Energy markets are particularly sensitive. Cross-border energy trade forms a critical component of the broader economic relationship. Pipelines, electricity grids, and resource exports operate on long-term contracts and stable regulatory frameworks. Any threat to these arrangements can influence pricing, supply expectations, and infrastructure planning. Traders are watching for signs of potential disruption that could ripple through global energy markets. Technology and data sectors also have a stake in the outcome. Modern trade agreements increasingly encompass digital infrastructure, intellectual property protections, and data flow regulations. a comprehensive $900 billion deal inevitably touches these areas. Companies operating in cloud services, telecommunications, and advanced manufacturing are evaluating how changes in trade terms could affect operations and competitive positioning. Public reaction is mixed and evolving. Some citizens view Canada's ultimatum as a necessary assertion of economic sovereignty. Others see it as a risky escalation that could harm both nations. In the United States, reactions vary along political and economic lines, with some calling for firm resistance and others urging swift compromise to protect jobs and market stability. The interplay between public opinion and policy decisions adds another layer of complexity to an already intricate situation. Media coverage has intensified the sense of urgency. Headlines emphasize the ticking clock, the scale of the deal, and the potential consequences of inaction. Financial news networks provide continuous updates on market reactions. Political commentators analyze possible strategies and outcomes. Social media amplifies every rumor and speculative report, creating an environment where perception can shift rapidly. As the deadline approaches, the atmosphere grows more charged. Every hour without a definitive response from Washington fuels further speculation. Investors adjust positions. Businesses prepare contingency plans. Governments around the world monitor developments, aware that the resolution of this standoff could influence broader trade dynamics. If a breakthrough occurs before the 4-8-hour window closes, it could restore confidence and stabilize markets. A revised agreement or interim framework might reassure investors and preserve the foundations of the bilateral relationship. If the deadline passes without resolution, however, the consequences could be far more dramatic. Countermeasures, tariffs, or regulatory actions could follow, triggering a chain reaction across industries and borders. The situation underscores a broader reality of modern economics. Interdependence creates both stability and vulnerability. Deeply integrated trade relationships generate prosperity, but also amplify the impact of conflict. Decisions made in one capital can reverberate globally within minutes. The ultimatum from Canada illustrates how leverage can emerge even within partnerships long considered stable. For Trump, the coming hours represent a critical test of leadership and negotiation strategy. For Canada, they represent an opportunity to assert priorities and reshape terms. For markets and citizens worldwide, they represent uncertainty and the hope that diplomacy will prevail over escalation. As the countdown continues, one thing remains certain. The outcome of this 4-8-hour ultimatum will not only determine the fate of a $900 billion trade deal, but also signal how major economies navigate conflict in an era of deep global interconnection. Whether this moment ends in agreement, standoff, or transformation, its impact will be felt far beyond the negotiating table.